Hatsune Miku is definitely the character of all time. Bro got added to the first anniversary of a Persona game. And then she appeared on a random billboard for 2 seconds, and then forces you to watch the opening which you just saw when you launched the game, and then proceeded to drop a massive kit for you to figure it out yourself. Hatsune Miku is such a character that I'll be dedicating 4 videos for her. The first video, which is this one, is going to be my first impression. I'll talk about what I feel about this character so far after a few days of using her. I'll also give you some numbers and data and testing for a 5-star weapon, and I'll also be talking about her kit. The second video is going to be about Miku against Anj. Who is the best navigator in the game? Or is there no best navigator, as both have different requirements, different teams work best for them? Well, stay tuned to find out. The third video is going to be about her A1 and A2. Since she's a call-out character, there's a good chance that she will never rerun. If she never reruns, then pulling for awarenesses might not be a bad idea. But the real question is, are they actually worth pulling and are they actually good? And the fourth and final video is a rotation guide for Hatsune Miku. How do you actually use her? It is not shocking to say that she's the most complicated character to use in the game so far. Not only does Miku has her own rotation, like the skills she used actually can be specific. The fact that she gives 2 extra turns means that the rotation of your other teammates can change, and you should change it to accommodate the extra 2 turns. And there's even a very weird and hidden mechanic of Hatsune Miku, which I'll talk about briefly in this video. Now let's begin with her kit. So she's rather, I would say, simple to understand, but to try and execute, trying to make rotations for her is not easy, okay? I think every single DPS is gonna have a different rotation with her, and her own skills as well will have a different rotation based on what you need. So to explain how she works, I'm just gonna revisit this. This is a very good and easy graphic to understand. There's gonna be 2 skills. Each skill has 3 songs, so there's Heaven, Spring Storm, and Play with Fire. You need to have a track for each song. It doesn't matter skill 1 or skill 2, you just need to have one track for each song. It doesn't have to be in order as well. As long as you have 3 tracks, you can activate skill 3, which gives you the 2 extra turns. But there are obviously good or better options compared to other skills. Like for example, the first song, Heaven, the pierce rate is obviously going to be the best option for the pierce. And the second skill, Spring Storm, this one, generally, weakness up is better. Unless you're hitting like a target that's not weak. Right? If you're using fire against ice, then obviously you want to put the party damage up. Play with Fire, there's crit damage and crit rate. This one, ideally you want crit damage, but you do crit rate if you cannot hit the 100% crit rate. So it kind of depends on what you need. So generally, the most ideal one is going to be pierce rate, weakness damage, and then crit damage. So these 3 you want. So basically it's going to be 2 skill 1 and 1 skill 2. And then after that, you do a skill 3 for the virtual console, which is basically the extra turns, 2 of them. But let's talk about them in a bit more detail. So aside from like the tracks and stuff, the Heaven, Spring Storm, and Play with Fire, the skill 1 and skill 2 both have their own effect, excluding the tracks. So skill 1 will have a party attack buff. Skill 2 will have a party damage buff by default. Then skill 1 Heaven is going to be the pierce rate, the good one, like I said just now. Then Spring Storm is going to be the damage. Then Play with Fire is going to be crit damage, which is the one that you ideally want. Then the skill 2, Heaven is going to be healing, which you can just ignore unless you really need healing. Then Spring Storm, this one is the weakness damage. This one is recommended. It's only 4-5%, but weakness damage is very useful. Now for skill 3, the biggest part of a kit, you need 3 tracks, which I already explained how you get it. Then you spend all the tracks to activate virtual console. And then all your enemies won't move, and every person on the team gets 2 turns. And then including the turn you use it on, that is 3 turns in a row that you move. And then there is also this thing. This thing is not exactly true. I'll talk about it a bit later. And this is the hidden mechanic that I talked about at the start of the video. Then all the buff that Miku gave will be extended by 2 turns. And then the buff that you don't have, like for example, the first turn you use the skill 1 Heaven, skill 1 Heaven, the pierce rate is already gone, it will reactivate. So no matter what, you will have at least 3 buffs, at least for A0 Miku. And you use her skill 3. Then you also get a party crit damage buff and restore SP. And then Miku also cannot move when you are in the concert. And there's a 6 on the action cooldown, so you can only use this once in a regular guild boss or SOS. Then as for passive, every time you gain a track, you get attack stacks up to 3 times, so that's 36% attack. And then when virtual console is active, so during the skill 3, party gets a free damage buff. And let's go through the weapon. Also weapon increases attack and then increases attack more after you gain a track. This attack is for herself only. Now a 5-star weapon. When I first looked at the 5-star weapon, also in my first look at the kit video, I thought this weapon is gonna be one of the best weapons in the game. Yeah, about that, I'll talk about that a bit later. This weapon gives herself attack plus party crit damage, and then gives skill amplification during virtual concert. Awareness. So A1 gives you even more skill amplification. This one only applies to herself, not the team. So all her skills will buff more. Then when you use a skill 3, you reset all allies highlight cooldown. This is very good. And then you also increase DRG and highlight damage by 10% and also double the charge. This allows you to use more DRG, use more highlights during the 2 turns, which is gonna help you do more damage. And for A2, when you use a skill 3, every single effect for skill 1 and skill 2 will be activated. So you have 6 buffs, or technically 5 because one of them is healing. Then with skill 3, and then you also gain a final damage increase by 8% to your party. A4, probably the worst thing about her kit, it's just a 25% attack for 2 turns. So, okay, technically second worst, the worst one should be this 2% attack. But yeah, in A6, definitely the most broken part about kit is basically like Akechi's recorded damage. So in the concert turn, every single tick of damage you do, Miku will do everything again. So if you do 100 million, Miku will do another 100 million herself. So that's insane. Extremely broken. So for the sake of free-to-playness, I won't talk too much about the higher awareness one, and most maybe A2. Like I said, I will make a video on A1 and A2. So now we can go back to the weapon. So, like I said already, first I thought the weapon is going to be broken. One of the best weapons in the game. I was completely wrong because I thought this skill amplification applies to the entire team. If it applies to the entire team, it's really the best weapon in the game. And it's the best support weapon in the game. Skill amplification very strong. Increases every skill multiplied by 10%. All your damage do 10% more. All your buffs and debuffs will buff and debuff 10% more. So basically, you will get 10% more score and more damage. Very strong. However, like I said, this skill application only applies to herself. And only during virtual concert. So during the 2 extra turns, you get the skill amplification. So when I found that out, I was a little bit disappointing. But the crit damage here is pretty high. This is actually higher than both Futaba and Anj. 18.1%, so that's good. But skill amplification only applying to herself during the concert. A bit disappointing. With that being said though, how good is the weapon actually? The weapon is okay, it's not bad. It's actually about as good as Anj 5-star weapon. I mean, I would still recommend this because, you know, she's a navigator, you're gonna use her very often, and she's also pretty good overall. The 4% here makes sense because Akihiko, this is Akihiko team, Akihiko has a crit damage cap to a DRG, that's why you only see 4%. Because the crit damage buff from the weapon doesn't really buff much compared to this Makoto Yuki team and Kasumi team. So just now I said that there's a secret mechanic that Miku has that is strange. Very strange. And it's this part, which I highlighted just now. This is when you use the skill 3, you reduce the cooldown of buffs, debuffs and continuous damage effects. I don't know if it's like a mistranslation or a misunderstanding or if it's a bug or they lied. I don't know, but this is very interesting. So I think we all thought that buffs will count down, right? Buffs will count down during the virtual concert turns, the 2 turns. That is not exactly true. Let me explain using a rotation. So let's say I use a rebellion here, right? If I use rebellion here, naturally how a normal battle works is I use rebellion, once Makoto Yuki X here will reduce from 3 turns to 2 turns, right? Then after that, 2 turns to 1 turn, and then after this turn, no more, which means that I need to rebellion here again. But as you can see, I did not. I didn't use rebellion, I used Tarokaja instead. Why? Turns out the buffs that you apply during the virtual concert turns, these 2 turns, don't actually count down. So what that means is if I use a rebellion here, it will last until the end, both the crit rate and the crit damage. The crit damage is 2 turns, right? But after this turn and this turn, you don't count down. So it only starts counting down here. After this it becomes 2 to 1, then 1 to 0. So it lasts until here, which allows me to use a Tarokaja here instead. Because I don't need to refresh my rebellion buff, because I already have it. So I can use this to buff attack instead. And this applies not just to Wanda, it applies to everybody. Anybody using a skill here, and only skill. Highlights, your 5-star weapon, your awarenesses don't actually get this, it's only the skill. So technically you can do like Side Nuke, Fire Ice from the twins, then you guard twice, and you still have the buff. I don't recommend that obviously, but we're just trying to give an example. And technically I can improve the rotation even more. I can actually do a skill 3, skill 2, then I can use a skill 3 here to buff the twins instead, because Makoto Yuki already has the buff and it can last until the end anyways. And you can even do a skill 2 Makoto Yuki here to buff himself, and that will also last until the end. Now do you understand why Miku is very complicated? It's not just her own rotation, her own rotation also matters, by the way. And this is not a good rotation. This was one of the first rotations I made. The Miku rotation not very good. Ideally, you want this to be here. The skill 2 spring skill, right before skill 3. I will talk more about it in the rotation guide, but it has something to do with the skill amplification. So something like this basically. I think this is gonna be probably the best rotation for Miku. You wanna use as weak the weakness one, and you will notice that I only use a single skill 2 for the entire fight. That is deliberate. It has something to do with the skill amplification. Again, I will explain that in the rotation guide. But if you just want to do rotation now, I recommend doing this. And it also varies, because sometimes you can skill 3 here as well. So you know, it's freaking complicated, man. You can skill 3 here, you can skill 3 here, but with Kasumi you want to skill 3 here, so that you can force a 4 turn weakness break turn. Yeah man, freaking Miku, man. And just a bit of example here, you can see that until the Tarokaja here, this buffs Kasumi. Then I do a Dionysus Revolution on the twins. I can do this because the crit damage is already applied, and this is the virtual concert turns, so the crit damage will last until the end because it doesn't count down. So yeah, that's another example of, you know, abusing the mechanic. Okay, actually I don't even know if it's a mechanic or it's a bug. I hope it's a mechanic. I mean, it does make rotations more difficult, but it also gives like an extra buff to Miku. Because Miku's extra turn and the capo from Anj is different. I think the capo might be better generally, because the capo is a rewind mechanic, it carries over all your buffs. Meanwhile for Miku, you have to reapply the buffs. But at the same time, it's also a bit weird, because your biggest damage turn is going to be these 2 turns, but you also have like a lot of buffs here, the last turn. Because you can stack everything, you can see a Tarokaja, Dionysus, you can stack everything on for this turn. So it's very strange. And then there's also the thing with debuff. Debuff also useful, you can see that I use a Nien Rakunda here, very far apart, but it will last until here. The entire, these 3 turns, you will have the Rakunda. But last turn don't have Rakunda, so I have to refresh it here. So you can stack the debuffs as well. But there's a lot of things to consider when you try to make rotations. And the skills, you can see that the skills here, again, really weird sets of skills, but it works. So now let me just give you my quick first impression of this character. So far I haven't really tested her with Anj, but I think it's going to be very interesting to see who is better for what team and what DPS. And Hatsune Miku is definitely one of the higher skill ceiling. Hatsune Miku definitely has like a higher skill cap, meaning you need to really know how to make rotations to make her work, because she's not easy to use, which means that you need to do a lot of testing, which is also a bit of a problem when the freaking skills, the animation, they take so damn long. Not only do you have 2 extra turns, which means like 30% more time per rotation, per battle. Animation is really the stupid switching song animation. Why does that take so long? And why do I have to manually click every time I switch? Why can't I skip 2 songs immediately? And why does it automatically switch it for me? Like, oh my god, so annoying. And there's also another thing with Devourer of Dreams, because unlike other navigators, you have to use the skills before you use the skill 3. If you use like Futaba or Anj, you can skip like the first 2 turns, and you can maybe start buffing a bit later. But Miku, no, you have to use the first 3 skills, at least for like A0, A1, A1. You have to use skills first, so you can use skill 3. And what that means is that you will do 1 damage, which means you're gonna break the boss easier, which is really annoying. So you can see that I got the twins, I got it here. So like for quite a few actions I don't have the skill amplification from the twins, but I cannot really do much because it's gonna break anyways. So I have to like guard and stuff. I still don't know why they haven't added the freaking button. So finally, should you pull Hatsune Miku? I mean, sure man, just pull. Very sure that she's gonna be better than Futaba anyways. Is she better than Anj? Probably. At least for some teams, yes. I think for Kasumi team in Devourer Dreams, definitely, because of how the rotation stacks. But yeah, as long as she's top 2, then I think she's worth it, because you just need 2 navigators for SOS skill boss, right? And she's a collab character, we have no idea if she'll ever rerun. So if you don't pick her now, there's a chance that you will never have her forever.